No series of Doctor Who is perfect, and no series of Doctor Who has absolutely no redeeming features. Wherever a series falls on your ranking of favourite series, they'll be good, they'll be bad, and they'll be ugly. And this is mine of all three in Series 11. Have you guys read this new Titan comic yet? I'm on issue 3. It's just got released last week, I think. I've been reading it. I'm not sure what I think yet. Might do a video on it at some point. If anybody's read it, let me know what you think in the comments below. And I might include them in the video if I eventually get round to doing it. Might wait till issue 4's out though. Or let me know on Twitter. IUDEX_Phil is my Twitter handle. So let me know your comments and I might include them in that video. That's only tangentially related to Series 11. We're here to talk about the TV show, of course, and what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, general overview of the series, and trying to keep a sort of relatively balanced. I've tried to come up with as many good as bad points generally, and yeah, see what I liked and what I didn't like. So I like to be a positive type of person. Let's start with something good. The first thing that I'm going to talk about that I really liked about this series was the opening theme and titles. Oh, they just looked so good and they sounded so good. Just absolutely amazing. I loved the way they harkened back to the original 1960s show, both in the sound of the theme tune itself, had elements from that, taken from that, and very much the style of it was kind of, felt like a very much evolving from that to a new 21st century take on that. And the same with the visuals that we saw on screen as well. Just that kind of ethereal, weird shapes and everything. I thought that was brilliant and definitely a great way to go. And the colours on it were all beautiful, and the way that pulsing ball starts at the beginning and then you got the bass drop. Love the bass drop, and I think that was a very good choice to harken back to the original series for that. In many ways, actually, there were quite a lot of harkings back to those original Hartnell years in this series, some of which worked, some of which didn't, and some of which could work if maybe tackled in a slightly different way. One of those is the fact that they had a 3 TARDIS team, which in this series wasn't handled particularly well. Now, I don't think that having a 3 TARDIS team is something that can't work. 3 companions, 4 TARDIS, a team of 4 in the TARDIS, including the Doctor. I think that absolutely can work. I think we've seen it work before. Way back in the 60s, yes. Okay, it didn't work so well in the 80s, but I think it definitely can work. It's just how you write it and how you make use of the characters. And the character that really suffered this year from this was Yasmin Khan. For pretty much most of the series, she could have not been there and it would have made barely any difference to the plot. You could take her out of any episode and it almost would have gone exactly the same. The 2 exceptions being Arachnids in the UK and Demons of Punjab. But really, she was just, even in those, she was kind of the mechanism to get you to the place. And then after that, she could have not been there and it wouldn't have been much different. The focus wasn't even on her in the episodes that revolved around her family. There was more focus still on Graham and Ryan. And while I loved that relationship and I loved that developing, Yasmin really got left behind. And it's such a shame because it promised so much. She's a really good actress, and actually she did do well with what she was given, but she just wasn't given the right stuff. So there's potential there. And also, what we saw in that very first opening episode of The Woman Who Fell to Earth seemed to be setting up some kind of character arc for her. She had the whole feeling dissatisfied with what she was doing with the police, feeling she wasn't doing enough. She wanted something a bit more challenging. I wanted to see that go through the series. And yet we didn't. We didn't see any kind of arc leading off from that. So it was kind of set up and not paid off. Hopefully they'll go there for Series 12. And hopefully, another problem with Yaz in the way she was written is she didn't feel like a police officer most of the time. After that first episode, she barely did anything that would make her feel like a police officer. In Arachnids in the UK, she gets a gun waved in her face. She's well within her jurisdiction there. She is a police officer in the city she's a police officer in, having a gun pointed at her face, and she doesn't even bother telling the person she's a police officer. You know, at that point, surely you would go, I'm a police officer, and if you continue, at bare minimum, you would say, and if you continue to wave that gun in my face, I will arrest you. That should be the bare minimum. But, no, she didn't say anything, strangely. And the only sort of hints of her police persona coming across were when she got one guy in a arm lock. I think that was Charlie, wasn't it, in Kablam? She got him in her arm lock. And there was one other time where she actually felt like a police officer. Can't think of it now. But there was one other time. But the rest of the series, there were plenty of opportunities where she could have used her police officer skills, and yet they didn't come across. So again, I hope that's something they work on in Series 12, but for now, for Series 11, it's definitely very much in the negative camp. Sticking on the theme of companions though, let's have a positive for them, because I think especially the more emotional storylines, the very personal storylines, especially between Ryan and Graham, and the stuff with Sharon D. Clarke's character, Grace, all of that was really well written, really lovely. I think it was written in a very sort of gritty British drama way, and it felt very real. The emotions felt real, and it was acted superbly as well, which I'll come to in another plus point in a second. And just generally, I think that's where Chibnall's strength lies as a writer. His strength lies in writing very human, emotional stories, and the way people react to those. And that was one thing that I was a little bit worried when Chibnall was announced to come on board, because I was judging him mostly on his previous Doctor Who episodes, which I thought were generally a bit weak and a bit juvenile, I thought. Whereas after that first episode, I was pleasantly surprised, because I thought he brought a very mature attitude to the episode. I thought that it felt like a grown-up drama, and the way he was writing the characters and the way they reacted to each other felt like a very grown-up drama, as opposed to the sort of more juvenile stuff he'd written for Matt Smith. So I was very pleased at that point, and I think that is definitely one of his strengths as a writer. But let's talk about his weaknesses as a writer as well, for the bad points, because he's definitely not perfect. While he does have his strengths as a writer, he also has his weaknesses. And his main weakness that I spotted throughout this series was, while he writes character interactions and moments between characters very well on the emotional level, what he doesn't write well and convincingly is exposition. In fact, it's just sometimes it's so cringingly bad that it just grinds the whole episode to a halt, which is a real shame, because in a sci-fi show you do get a lot of exposition. It's just one of the things that comes with it. And exposition in itself isn't necessarily bad, it's how you write it. And it's just not one of his strengths. He just can't seem to do it. In all of his episodes, there are moments where it just feels like, okay, let's stop the episode and have the exposition now. And that's one of his major flaws as a writer. I think try and avoid exposition, Chibnall, or maybe, get someone else to write those bits, because he's not very good at them, unfortunately. So while he has his strengths as a writer, he also has his weaknesses, as does every writer, but those are his strengths and his weaknesses in my personal view. Sticking with the characters now for the next positive, because reflecting on what I just said about the last positive, about how well written the sort of emotional moments, the character moments, the relationship moments are, the person that did that absolutely brilliantly and performed it every single time, and I was absolutely amazed by, was the character of Graham, performed by Bradley Walsh, who I was very skeptical when he was announced for this series. I only really considered him as the guy off the game show, so I was apprehensive. But wow, did he knock it out of the park with some of those performances. The subtlety that he had, I thought, was absolutely brilliant. He didn't overplay it, played it just right. You felt the emotional right from that very first episode when he was doing the speeches at Grace's funeral, and then in later episodes when he returned to Grace's house and when you saw him, when he saw Grace again in the other universe, all of those moments, he played them so subtly, so gently, and I think they worked really well. And for me, he is one of my, possibly even my favourite New Who companion, because of the skill he brought to all of that stuff. It was absolutely fantastic. And I said in a few of my reviews, I wonder if he'll die, because my God, that would be a really powerful storyline. But and part of me wanted that because it would be such a good storyline, a good powerful storyline. But I'm glad we've got him for another year at least, because he is fantastic, and I'm glad we're going to have him sticking around for a bit longer. My next negative for the series is a lack of story arc, which Chibnall did as a very deliberate thing. He wanted standalone, individual, he wanted it to be very accessible, but what I think that meant was that it didn't feel like the series was heading anywhere. One good thing about story arcs is it creates a narrative flow for the series, and yeah, we had some kind of personal story arcs, the whole Graham and Ryan relationship and getting over Grace's death. That was all great having that. I just felt it could have done with it could have been a very subtle thing. I thought they were going to go that way with the and in a way they kind of did. They had the Stenza mentioned again in the second episode, and then they popped up at the end, but there was nothing in between. There would have been, just even if it was just a few light little moments there that mentioned them or hinted at something. I hope we get some semblance of a story arc next year as well, and that it feels like it's going somewhere a bit more throughout the series. Now, my favourite type of story in this series was by far the historicals, particularly Demons of Punjab and Rosa. But, Witchfinders was okay, but those other two really were fantastic. They were emotional, they were gripping, they did something different. They didn't sort of just do this thing that Modern Who has done with historicals, where they've gone, hey, let's just throw a big monster into this historical setting. They did something different and interesting. I was actually really hoping for a pure historical. They didn't quite go that far, but they kind of skirted around it and almost got there. And I like that. I like the fact that, for the most part, those two historical episodes were dealing with very real situations in history. Just the team, the TARDIS team having to deal with history as it was. And I love the fact that they didn't hold back on that. They didn't hold back on how those periods of time really were, the brutality of them. Ryan having that slap at the beginning of Rosa from that guy, them experiencing the racism, in Demons and Punjab, seeing that scene near the end where Prem is killed by his own brother. All that stuff is very powerful stuff, and I absolutely am so glad they did it, because for me, those were the highlights of the episodes. You've seen my Series 11 ranking, they form the top 2 episodes of the series. So I think that was very good. And even the Witchfinders, although I think it fell down at the ending, the last sort of quarter of the episode, the first sort of 2/3 were pretty good, and explored some interesting themes as well. So I liked those as well. I'm really hoping for some more historicals next year. But not every episode was good. There were some bad episodes too, particularly for me, Arachnids in the UK was just not a very good episode. But then also just the season finale. Let's talk about that, because that's another thing I'm going to mark down as on my bad list. It didn't feel like a season finale. And yes, we got Resolution, which kind of did a better job of wrapping up the series, but it should have wrapped up with, what is technically, and will be on the DVD box set, and is on the DVD box set, the season finale. It didn't feel enough like a season finale, and partly that was probably due to what I mentioned earlier about the not having a story arc to kind of build up to slightly and to hint at and get us excited for, but also it just didn't feel epic enough for a season finale. It was called the Battle of Ranskor av Kolos, and there was no battle. And that is one of its biggest sins, I think. It wasn't big enough, it wasn't epic enough, and they wasted Tim Shaw, who I thought in the beginning was good, but in the end, nah, at the end of that last episode. Wasted. I think they wasted him. Hopefully they'll bring him back and redeem him again, but for now, his parting... I mean, he didn't even put up a fight at the end there against Graham. That was just a bit of a disappointing finale to the season. Hopefully, next year, again, I'm hoping that all of these negatives become... They resolve them for next year, and they do something a bit more oomphy for the season finale. Time for another plus point, the music. The music for this series was beautiful. We'd had, obviously, Murray Gold for a good 12, 13 years, and his style of music was very orchestral, very big, and I loved it. But it was good to have a change, and I really liked what Sega Nakanola did in bringing in that kind of very ethereal vibe to it, and sort of playing around with more electronic sounds, and just sort of, it was very much more haunting, and I liked it. And there were a few good tracks in there that I really liked. This is kind of half a good and half a bad, because I really like the music, and while watching the episodes, it works really well in helping create the mood and everything like that. I don't think it works so well as a soundtrack CD, and I'm not going to be buying that, because there are only maybe 2 or 3 tracks which I have any desire to listen to independently of the visuals that go with it on screen. I think the music is perfect for creating the moods and stuff that is needed, but it doesn't necessarily work when not for me anyway. I'm a suite of music. I'm not that. That's not the kind of thing I like listening to. I want to put on a track that has 3 to 5 minutes of impact, and I don't like it where it's a suite and goes up and down and all over, which is very much what this new soundtrack has done. So I won't be buying the new soundtrack, but I do love the music within the episodes. And my final negative for this series is that the Doctor herself didn't have any really epic defining moments. There's always a moment in every Doctor, certainly every Doctor from Modern Who, where you just punch the air and go yes, because they've done something that's absolutely epic, and it could be one of Capaldi's speeches, or it could be David Tennant turning dark and angry very quickly. There's so many different things that the Doctors have done in the past that have been like, yes, that is their moment. Jodie hasn't had that yet, and that's a shame. She came close a couple of times. Her talk with King James while she was tied up, that came very close to it, but it didn't quite get there. And there was a moment or two in Resolution where I thought they might be getting there, but it didn't quite fulfill it for me. I'm sure she will get there. Certainly other Doctors didn't get there till their second, sometimes even third series. It didn't get that really wow moment. For Peter Capaldi, it was the Zygon episode for me. And that wasn't it. I don't think that was in his first series, was it? My light's gone. So I'm not massively worried that we haven't had it. We could get it next year, and that will be fine, and that will be consistent with other Doctors as well. I don't think David Tennant really got his moment until the second series. Some might even argue till the Waters of Mars. But certainly, it's in the negative column that it wasn't this year, and that we didn't see it from her yet. And one more positive, because let's end on a positive. I think Resolution was the best Dalek episode we've had since Series 1. I loved what they did with having the creature outside of its casing. I thought that was a very unique, different way to tell a Dalek story. And just seeing one Dalek and how much destruction it can do is a very interesting story. And I think that one should be told every so often. And it had been 12 years since we'd seen it. And it worked again here. And they did it in a different way. So I really liked that. I definitely think it's the best since Series 1. You may disagree with me, and that's fine. But for me, that's going in the tick positive column. But look, they're just my positives and my negatives. Oh, I didn't do an ugly. Tim Shaw, he's ugly. I mean, look. Blue aliens, nothing against blue aliens, but when you start sticking teeth in your skin, I think you got a problem. And it don't look good. Yeah, he can be the ugly one. But no, joking aside, I actually quite liked him as a character in the opening episode. Just lost it a bit at the end in the finale. Hopefully he's in suspended animation, they can bring him back and we can see something else from him. That would be nice. I'd like to see him with more of his species as well. So that's just my views on what was good and what was bad about this series. Let me know in the comments below what you thought. And yeah, don't forget to like, share, subscribe and all that jazz for more Doctor Who content from me coming at least every other week. See you soon. Goodbye.